Silent Hill 2 is a video game that is genre-defining, one of a kind, something we will never see again, and I want to talk about it. This will be multiple things: a review, an analysis, and a video essay. In some cases, a letter. A letter sent out to you, asking you to come back to this lovely town of Silent Hill. I'm waiting for you there. This can be our special place. So let's dive in, as I explore the history of the game, the themes, the theories, and my opinions on all of it. This will be a mixture of my thoughts and feelings during my time with the game, to how I've perceived the overall themes and its meanings. I'll be doing this while also encompassing some accepted and popular opinions, official developer insight, and supplementary media surrounding Silent Hill 2, like the novelization. When something that is considered art is analysed, we will always get different perspectives because everyone will take away a different lesson. Some parts of the game will hit harder if we relate to those characters or events specifically. One piece of art can have many interpretations, multiple descriptions, and ultimately an unclear conclusion. Silent Hill 2 fits right in here. This analysis is being created for the purpose to talk about my first experience with the series and from a newcomer's perspective, so I'll try and minimise comparisons of other Silent Hill games or the added context they can give, as I like to focus on this one experience. That being said, I may spend a brief moment acknowledging events that have previously or yet to occur if I've picked up on its relevance and I see it contributing to the points that I've made. This is my first time doing anything of this nature, so I really hope you will enjoy this video. I expect there may be moments throughout where I circle back to a previously mentioned topic depending on the context of what part of the game I'm talking about. In terms of preparation for this video, I have rewatched my own Let's Play to remind myself of my reactions and read over older comments. Here's just a few shoutouts to those who have supplied me with great comments along the way, so thank you for that. I've dug up old interviews with developers, found scans of old PlayStation magazines, and then had to be exposed to questions like this one: Mario 64 or Resident Evil control scheme? Love that as a way to ask 3D or 2D controls. I've also watched the Making of Silent Hill 2 video from the European Special 2-disc edition. I also recently picked up the infamous HD collection for cheap on the Xbox store and played Born from a Wish, Maria's small side story, which adds much to the character. I want to say this won't be a complete and definitive story recap and analysis, as there will most likely be things missed and points I could have made, but that's in the magic of Silent Hill 2, that it's a very complex and detailed work of art that I can only really capture some of what can be discussed about the game in one video, but I have tried to make this concise and clear. I first took a chance 6 months ago when starting up my channel again to play Silent Hill 2 blind and share it with YouTube. It turned out incredibly well, and I'm still blown away by the love, support, and community that has grown from it. You're all the reason this video is getting made, and I just want to say thank you. I think it's fair to talk about Silent Hill 2 first in the series, as it was my first exposure to the universe and by far the most impactful. Silent Hill 2, developed by Team Silent and based on Fyodor Dostoevsky's 1866 novel Crime and Punishment, was released in September of 2001, released within the first year of the PlayStation 2's life cycle. For some perspective on this release, other games that released around this time frame were Ico, Devil May Cry, Grand Theft Auto 3, Metal Gear Solid 2, Jak and Daxter, and Final Fantasy X. Those titles are just some of the most notable for the PlayStation 2, but there were other huge titles released in the latter half of 2001 also, like Halo Combat Evolved with the launch of the Xbox. Around the release of Silent Hill 2, Devil May Cry and Metal Gear Solid 2 were being discussed and compared to it due to the games releasing within a close time frame. Konami was set to release 2 of these games, both sequels, with Capcom giving us the first of the franchise for DMC. The reason Devil May Cry was getting talked about during this time of comparison seems most likely due to the fact that the game was originally conceived as Resident Evil 4, but was reworked into its own story. Resident Evil and Silent Hill are both iconic survival horror franchises now, but due to the Resident Evil series' head start, there was a rivalry and very active comparison between the two, especially when the first Silent Hill was coming out. In 2001, Resident Evil had already been established with multiple titles while Silent Hill was getting its first sequel, with no mainline Resident Evil game in sight, as we would see the prequel Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil Remake released later in 2002, and Resident Evil 4 not until 2005, Silent Hill was at centre stage. At this time, having been born in the mid-90s, I was nowhere near close to being able to experience this game. In fact, I don't think I even recall even knowing anything about the franchise's existence or importance until recent years. I had seen more Resident Evil as it was more established, but I was terrified of anything horror-related and steered clear of the genre for years to come. My knowledge or exposure of Silent Hill since it came out has been this meme circulating from Tumblr about Pyramid Head. So I'm aware this was a part of Silent Hill in some way, and the HD collection that I would have seen on shelves around the time of release and general buzz about Fog Bad. So to introduce myself to the series with next to no knowledge of it made it such a pleasure to experience this game, and it's one of the very few titles that inspired me to actually research its development. Team Silent games are looked upon fondly, with high praise to this day, as Silent Hill 2 and 3 most notably have aged incredibly well. I cannot speak for Silent Hill 4 The Room, as at this time I'm writing this, I've yet to play it. Many consider Silent Hill 2 to be one of, if not the greatest horror experiences in a video game for many reasons. This game's approach to horror is so distinct that it will sit with you, bury its way deep into your subconscious, and stay there forever. Every horror game, movie, or piece of media is now compared to what this game did for the genre. This game wasn't jump scares, it wasn't loud screeches and ghosts chasing you down a hallway. We didn't get overloaded with horror tropes that made us roll our eyes. We were given a gift, and while I was 19 years late to experiencing this gift, I appreciate it all the same. Let's start with the game's introduction. I personally skipped this intro as it was recommended to me to do so to avoid spoilers, and I'm glad I did. Compared to the first game, which gives us useful info relating to the events that cause you to crash into Silent Hill, jump-starting the events of the first game, here we get more of a montage of what's to come. Some lines of dialogue are removed if you have yet to complete the game to mitigate the spoilers, but I think I would have preferred the approach the first game took in regards to an intro. Curious that we are actually shown a direct shot of the in-water ending here, with James carrying the body of Mary in black and white, with another shot of it provided in a guidebook. There are other shots that are not in the game itself as well, such as Eddie and Laura next to a van, Angela running through a house that we see from the outside, mixed with other flashes of environments and soured flesh throughout. The highlight of this introduction is most definitely the theme of Laura, only the beginning of an incredible soundtrack filled with a variety of tracks, somber pieces evoking emotional responses after critical moments, or this suspenseful hammering as you fall deeper and deeper into madness, accompanied with masterful sound design. And this is what I really appreciate about Silent Hill's approach to horror. It's not always what's shown to you, but the atmosphere you are soaked in. It's the sound design and music mixed with the amazing fog and lighting of the environments you navigate. The sound design, where many sounds in the game are random and can be different on each playthrough. Screams, whispers, crying, screaming, and more can all be unique to the player. The fog is truly one of the staples and most iconic visual elements of these games that make them stand out from the rest. A clever way to hide limitations on the game's draw distances and empty backgrounds, the fog serves a purpose for the game's feel and storytelling as well as a technical purpose. It's there to make you feel claustrophobic, unsure of what could be right in front of you as a very dark and chilling energy surrounds the town. All of these elements together represent the critical importance of a world-made game, from every aspect. A game can have great gameplay with an interesting story, but it can fail to provide an engaging soundtrack or memorable set pieces. It can bring the game down as a whole. Everything that pieces this game together contributes to the end result, and it really is down to the hard work of these people right here. This group of people at Team Silent are the most notable for their contributions. I'm not going to embarrass myself on terrible pronunciations, but this group really gave us something special and made a lot of sacrifices to bring Silent Hill to life. The unforgettable monster designs, environmental design, and set pieces accompanied by terrifying and disturbing music and sound designed to constantly stress you out and keep you on edge, testing your mental capacity to endure the experience. So many pieces that come together flawlessly when any one of these could have let the game down, but all of these elements shine through even today. Drawing influence from Hitchcock, Cronenberg, Lynch, Stephen King, and many other sources of what Team Silent considered the best types of horror. They didn't want to go for the Resident Evil 2 approach to horror, which they stated felt too Hollywood and more like an action movie than horror. Their goal with the Silent Hill series was to make you scared on an instinctive level. This isn't to say the game is without flaws. While I battled the controls, this is also due to myself adjusting to tank controls and a different playstyle. That being said, movement and combat can still be a little rough. The camera also, while we can move it, can tend to feel uncontrollable and difficult at points. These gripes are minor, as what we are presented with at the end of the day is a love letter to the horror genre and the team trying their absolute best with all the tools available to them. I don't feel alone in this, because even back when the Silent Hill games were released, controls were seen as a negative compared to the rest of what the game brought to the table. I found my time in Silent Hill 2's gameplay much more enjoyable than the first game naturally, but poor controls with, and at times poor camera, don't really mix well. Silent Hill 2 gives us a dark, horrific, and at times very real, impactful story, and one of the most important elements to a game wanting to tell a seriously dark story is the voice acting. Voice acting can be so easily hit and miss. Dialogue can hit the mark, or fail in its delivery, or sound ridiculous even with context. And let's admit, James does have some lines of dialogue that stand out in ways that can make us laugh, or turn our head about why he'd remark in such a way. Provoking Eddie by asking if he's gone nuts instead of showcasing empathy, but there's a point to that, and it's relevant to James's character. He doesn't actually care about Eddie. Why would he try and empathize with him? But what the voice acting does right is what's important. It's extremely high quality given the time frame the game was released in. Voice talent was very well chosen. Monica Horgan is our standout of the voice cast, voicing both Mary and Maria. Guy Seehee gives us a performance nobody else could give as James Sunderland, who plays off a mentally unwell and depressed character so naturally. These other characters we meet, Angela, Eddie, and Laura, all have voice actors giving a performance exactly how the characters are written. Angela's scenes always had me sitting on the edge of my seat. The way that she'd speak, seemingly always elsewhere mentally, had me encapsulated in what would happen next. For more facial expression examples, we're told that the way Eddie's pupils are enlarged and his eye movements are abnormal on purpose. With manually animated cutscenes, this way they could also make Angela the runaway teenager much older in appearance via subtle changes to the facial structure and voice. This was intentional, as she also sounds older and unhinged. Played by an actress in her 40s, I was constantly impressed with cutscenes during my playthrough, and knowing the effort that went into them makes it much more impressive. I think Eddie has the worst animations of the cast, while Angela and Laura are my favourites, purely because Laura is captured as a mischievous child so well, and Angela's range of expressions always got to me. The way Angela says, "Lost?" is probably my personal favourite facial animation of the game. And now on to Maria. Constructed to be a sort of perfect woman, without wrinkles, smooth skin, youthful nature, and sexual confidence, outside of the game, Maria is almost completely modelled off of Christina Aguilera. She represented a lot of what James had been internalizing during his time looking after Mary. I was very impressed with the animations in the face from these scenes, and I appreciated looking further into why the characters were modelled this way. There will be more on Maria later. The first game had some impressive animations in their cutscenes, but this is now elevated on PlayStation 2 with detailed facial expressions that I was not expecting. While motion capture was used for general animations of the characters' walking cycles or attacks, the faces themselves were painstakingly handcrafted. This allowed for more freedom to manually alter specific details of the characters' faces. The graphics have received a huge upgrade from the first game. New hardware helps this, but Team Silent also noted that naturally they were also facing challenges adapting to the new hardware. Character models are very impressive, in cutscenes even more so, and the environmental design really needed to be perfect to immerse you in this world and provide an anchor of realism in a game that is nothing but surreal. The world and story of Silent Hill 2 still accomplishes its position as a standalone experience without the history of the previous game. On my playthrough of Silent Hill 2, I knew nothing of the lore that came before, none of the religious events that had taken place. I was James Sunderland in this game completely, fully immersed in his story and nothing else. On the subject of religious events, however, this game moves away from it almost entirely at first glance, as it focuses more on James and his psychological state. It's a personal tale that does not want to relate to the events of the previous game, with no story elements tied to this either. The instances where the themes of the occult and religion come into play is during the Rebirth ending, when James mentions the old gods haven't left this place, in his attempt to resurrect Mary through various objects found on a second playthrough of the game. The game has references to the first game, but wants to provide a new, harrowing experience to keep you guessing every step of the way. With context, however, this can change. The events of the first game have still occurred. Harry Mason left the town with a newly birthed Heather Mason after Cheryl and Alessa came together at the end to give Harry a chance at a new life, to leave this place a saviour and begin again. But this has consequences, as we know that Heather Mason is not truly free of Silent Hill and God itself. In between the events of Silent Hill and Silent Hill 3, this is where James fits in. The town has been forever changed by the events of Harry Mason's visit, and the energy of the town begins to shift. We see that while this is not a direct sequel to the first game, elements in the background carry over, influencing the stories and experiences of its visitors, calling them to Silent Hill for their turn. Eventually this will happen to Heather Mason as well, although there are other characters that forcibly try to make that happen. I feel as if Alessa indirectly influences the events to come, purely based on the rituals performed prior to Silent Hill 2's story. It seems logical there would be residual energies staining the town that was so close to summoning a god, and it would be compensating for it. While the first game begins in a daze with a car crash and an urgent objective to find your lost daughter, this game begins in an uncomfortable silence. A more calming yet unsettling introduction. The game sets the tone right away. We see a man staring right into his own soul through the bathroom mirror, trying to regain his composure, to psych himself up for the journey ahead. This man is James Sunderland, and will accompany him through everything that follows, for better or worse.
Mary, could you really be in this town?
A cinematic introduction is next for us, as we have Mary speaking to James through the letter, and James in turn reflecting on why he's here, because to him, it makes no sense. He lost his wife 3 years ago. Could she really be here? In their special place? We'll have to venture into the town itself to know more. This is truly a psychological experience from the moment you begin, as the game frequently lies and misleads you in both subtle and obvious ways. Pushing forward as we travel through the forest to the cemetery, the journey down was made longer by the developers on purpose, building on that tension that sets the mood. We're exposed in the open with animalistic noises in the distance, where we eventually are greeted with a curious red square that feels like it's burrowing its way into the back of our minds. Even saving the game does not truly feel like a safe experience, it's a bit unnerving. This is all a mind game, yet we're made to push forward with the mentality of us already travelling far into the forest. There's no turning back now. What we can learn and analyze from James's time in Silent Hill is that the experience is unique for all its visitors. The town for us is filled with monsters, each one representing parts of James's traumatic experiences, fears, repressed emotions and memories. This is really effective for gameplay reasons of literally battling your own demons, and I think that works really well in this game. Masahiro Ito, the artist for the game, wanted to bring the concept of soured flesh to life, to represent these parts of James. Most of these encounters and the game itself is highly sexual in nature as it explores the manifestation of these desires through its creatures and environments. From the nurses and mannequins representing James's sexual urges and frustrations, to creating Pyramid Head purely as a way to be punished for his actions, this Pyramid Head in particular performing these grotesque sexual acts early on in the game. The appearances of these Pyramid Heads that we see throughout the game as well were created and formed from the executioners of Silent Hill's eerie history, as we see later in the Historical Society. A lot of what we were exposed to is visceral and disturbing. Even Maria exists in the form of a sexually confident woman who shares a likeness to Mary, only for her to be killed multiple times in front of James, just to be brought back to life and be killed again, punishing James further. The fact that Maria herself is a creation of the town, but also her own person, is something she constantly struggles with. Maria has a strong urge to cling to James, and she's unsure why. She's a lost soul, born from a wish. To expand on this, Maria never interacts with another character, only James. The bowling alley comes close, but Maria chooses to wait outside, further showcasing her only purpose for being in Silent Hill to be with James out of his need or want for Mary to be alive, but also to punish James for what he's done. Maria's butterfly tattoo also carries symbolism, as butterflies represent rebirth. In a sense, part of Mary is reborn through Maria as they share certain memories. So let's take a moment to expand on Born from a Wish, because this does have relevance. Maria wakes up, alone in Heaven's Night. She's frightened, and decides to try find someone else in the town. Little does she know, the person she's truly looking for is James. As Maria is helping out the owner of the Baldwin mansion, Ernest Baldwin, she is trying to find a substance apparently capable of reviving Ernest's dead daughter, Amy. The character of Ernest is only a voice behind a door at this point. Ernest soon provides Maria with some interesting news, that a man named James Sunderland is a bad man looking for the you that isn't you. This begins to trigger those shared memories once again, as Maria remembers the man that murdered his wife. After this, it's revealed to us that nobody was actually behind the door where the voice was coming from, which tells us that Ernest was either a ghost or even a voice representing the town itself with the knowledge of James. If we were to really come to a conclusion, however, it seems much more likely that it would have been a ghost who was bound to his family's mansion. After this, Maria contemplates ending her life in this moment, but ultimately the town's power is stronger and she begins making her way to Rosewater Park, almost as if she has no control over her actions. She's being pushed to go to that spot, one of James and Mary's special places. So let's talk about the power of the town itself, because what it does is it connects directly to the mental state of its visitors and impacts their experiences. It creates alternate versions of the town, differing for each character. Eddie's Silent Hill is completely different, already slightly unhinged, where he's surrounded by people laughing and taunting him, further driving him into madness that eventually causes him to reach a breaking point and turning against James, revealing what he'd done before running away to this town. His version of Silent Hill is just this, torment on what he is all too familiar with, and we even see it in dialogue with our characters, where both Laura and James have both said things that affect Eddie, at least internally. Even Laura calls him names, while Eddie enjoys his miraculous pizza delivered by Pizza Hill. And yes, I may have gotten carried away with that image by making a logo and giving everyone their pizza, but once you start, it's hard to stop. I'm sorry, but I assume this must be the place Eddie dialed in to get it. Let's get back to the video. So let's talk about Angela now, because Angela's experiences may be the most tragic of all, with her sexual trauma rooted in her childhood and how that manifests into one of the most unsettling boss fights ever in a video game. From the creature itself and what it represents, to the holes in the walls simulating penetration, it's right there in front of us, but not force-fed for us to acknowledge. I know that in my experience, my boss fight with Abstract Daddy, I actually got a bit too overwhelmed and confused, and I think that's kind of the point. It's kind of very sudden that you're met with this experience in this boss fight, that you really pick up on these details later, because you're not really focused on analysing your surroundings, you're just trying to shoot your boss in the face and then figure out what happens after the fact. This is mainly due to the fact that the game is meant to be analysed and constructively picked apart to get these finer details that can be overlooked when overcome by those initial horror reactions to the situation. Angela was summoned to Silent Hill where she felt that she could find her family, but it was her punishment instead. I feel, out of everyone, Angela above all did not deserve to be summoned to Silent Hill and live out these horrific situations, where Abstract Daddy was recreated only to be further scarred from the encounter. Murdering her father out of self-defense feels certainly justified when you know the context surrounding her upbringing. I'd also like to point out that the two boss fights we have including or surrounding these characters have environments specific to the character themselves. You could say when we're fighting Eddie, we're actually paying a visit to his Silent Hill surrounded by the hanging meat wearing pants, which seems like mental torture that Eddie would be exposed to. And as previously mentioned, we cross over into Angela's Silent Hill as we are exposed to a room specific to her traumas and fears with a monster to go with it. I also don't feel that this is reaching too hard, considering the last time that we see Angela, we're experiencing what she sees all the time. And then in contrast to those characters, we have Laura, and Laura's purity as a child allows her experience to be that of a normal Silent Hill, lacking in the horrific imagery and nightmares that everyone else is subjected to, and was purely an innocent in the story, just wanting to find her friend Mary again. My favourite moments in the game can also be described as the most disturbing moments. Our second encounter with Angela still freaks me out, as I was so engaged in that scene. The music, the dialogue, mixed with how unstable Angela is in this moment.
Are you afraid?
And how the scene was framed and put together, it was very visually engaging, with the constant fear and anxiety of the knife in her hand. When I continue to think of unsettling moments, one of the first ones was entering this particular room again after being intimidated by our first look at Pyramid Head. The room is different now. The TV is now on with just static and a body sitting in the chair, lifeless. While we're not given an angle to show this in the game, this body is an exact replica of you, James Sunderland. In retrospect, I really want to connect this as almost a parallel to the major story moment at the end of the game, which sees James in shock, hanging his head in front of the static TV. I wonder that if Laura hadn't entered the room to break James out of that moment, could he have ended up the same way we saw him in this scene? Taking his own life there, unable to deal with the guilt of his choices. Shortly after we leave the apartment complex, we meet someone new. Or is it someone familiar?
Mary? No, you're not.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
No, my late wife.
We are introduced to Maria, who flaunts a sexier, more confident appearance compared to Mary, but they share one distinct feature. Maria and Mary have the exact same face. She comes along with us because she too is seeing monsters in this town and is scared of them. As Maria is a creation of the town itself for James, it's clear that they share the exact same experiences in Silent Hill. And then we come to Brookhaven Hospital. And Brookhaven Hospital is a turning point in the game where a lot happens, many things change. And here's our next visual representation of James's sexual frustrations brought to life in the nurses. With context of the story and mental state of James, we can easily tell those visits to the hospital, while Mary was sick, only fed into his desires and what he felt was lacking. The man who states he loves Mary and doesn't hate her, as Maria suggested earlier. But love is complicated. It has many different definitions, viewpoints, it's entirely subjective, and every individual has a different outlook on love. So let's look at some common definitions. 1. A profoundly tender, passionate affection for another person. 2. A feeling of warm personal attachment or deep affection, as for a parent, child, or friend. 3. Sexual passion or desire. And 4. A person toward whom love is felt, beloved person, a sweetheart. Our third example provided is where we have a link, sexual passion or desire. James and Mary go to the town of Silent Hill, presumably to get away from the normality of their life and experience something new. Maybe this could improve aspects of their relationship that is lacking. They want to spend time at the hotel, their special place. Their trip to the hotel in Silent Hill connects so greatly to our third example. They have this magical time, only for Mary to fall terminally ill shortly after, robbing James of what he desires. We see that our character, our protagonist, is not a heroic character. He's not trying to do the right thing. He's trying to do right by himself on his own terms, and he won't let anything stop him from pushing forward. We play as a selfish character who only wishes to feed his own desires, and for that, Silent Hill is James's place of torment. Maria shows signs of sickness and takes some time to lay down and leaves her side during our time in the hospital. I want to feel like this game is giving us some Mary and Maria parallels here, as we know Mary was residing in the hospital, and this could be echoing through into James's world that in turn affects Maria. Maria represents what James wants out of Mary in this perfect woman, but being this close to the hospital really seems to be affecting that image. We see Laura here, who makes James react in anger, which is one of the first times we've seen James react this way, irrationally. This happens when Laura mentions that she's known Mary for the past year, directly contradicting James's timeline in his head. Laura doesn't appreciate this and traps James, causing him more torment. After a terrifying and unnerving encounter with the flesh lips that are hanging above James's head, trying to strangle them with their legs, we are then exposed to the other world for the first time here. The air raid sirens kicking in as we are taken somewhere else, somewhere darker. We do get reunited with Maria here, and it's not a happy reunion. Maria feels abandoned and disrespected. James's first thought?
James!
Mary? Oh, Maria. It's you. I thought you were... Sorry. Anyway, I'm glad you're alive.
And then we have Maria's very appropriate response to James in that matter.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? You don't sound very happy to see me. I was almost killed back there. Why didn't you try to save me? All you care about is that dead wife of yours. I've never been so scared in my whole life. You couldn't care less about me, could you?
No, I just...
Then stay with me. Don't ever leave me alone. You're supposed to take care of me.
The truth, directly shouted into James's face. Maria loosens up. We get her begging for James to stay with her. He's supposed to take care of her, like he was supposed to take care of Mary. This scene does give us a believable response by Maria in this situation though, as she feels second to a dead wife and not valued by James even though she's right there for him. But another reason that Maria acts this way and lashes out actually foreshadows a piece of dialogue much later before the final encounter. We actually end up listening to a very lengthy bit of dialogue where we see similarities in Maria and Mary's changes in mood under stress and how they both lash out in anger but then shortly after recoil and become soft, almost apologetic. And then outside of all of this very serious and grim dialogue and situation and characterization, we're given a particular silly moment that's scary in a whole different way.
Challenger today is James Sunderland! Are you ready to play Trick or Treat?
We get the elevator game show. It's completely surreal, almost out of place and straight wacky, and I love it. This moment is either loved or hated for its inclusion, but it weirded me out immensely when it starts speaking directly to us. I think it really adds to the creep factor of the game when you realise that the elevator is moving during the entire scene, which really only strengthens one of the game's core themes, that is repeated very often: descent. James Sunderland, it announces. This elevator tests our knowledge of Silent Hill's geography and if we paid attention to the story and history of what came before. If we're smart, we're rewarded for our efforts. What comes next, though, is our first instance of a character's death in the game. And of course, it's Maria. Pyramid Head emerges from behind us as we're chased through narrow corridors, only for Maria to become trapped on the other side of the exit. James is desperately trying to open those doors. He wants Maria. He's trying to choose Maria. He's trying to save her. We witness Maria brutally executed in front of James's eyes. Further torment and punishment to lose what he tries to hold close. Now, I said this wasn't going to be a full story recap, but I feel that Brookhaven has a lot of interesting moments, a lot of things relevant to the main themes of the game and was worth an analysis of its own. It serves as a bridging chapter before everything changes and things escalate. We've got this quote: "There was a hole here. It's gone now." Quotes like this have been torn apart for years about what it could mean, represent, or mean for James's current mental state. Next to this writing on the wall we have this, about if James wanted to see Mary, he should just die. It's pretty clear what this one does represent, as we're given a pretty big hint already that Mary is actually gone, and if James kills himself, he can be reunited. To me, this fits very well with the in-water ending. A curious thing to note on this wall, that towards the bottom it states James, written on its own. Is this note speaking to James and just started a new line for the word, or was it signed off by James, a note to himself? If you inspect the text in-game, however, it does show that it's a comma followed by the word James, so maybe it's not signed off, but it's still good to think about. The Historical Society becomes much more than a history lesson. The town of Silent Hill, which we feel we know the layout of at this point, is, for lack of a better phrase, dropped down into a series of holes of which there is no return. Speaking of holes, as we progress further in the game, we are falling deeper and deeper into madness. This game exposes us to literal and metaphorical holes that James jumps right into. This is reflected in the environments, jumping between what seems like a normal town covered in fog, mixed with the transitions to the other world where we are exposed to even more disturbing elements than before. The staircase we take down to the Toluca prison is one of the more iconic and memorable moments of the game. It's seemingly endless as a siren wails in the distance. This again is more of an illusion of Silent Hill, as after we reach the bottom it's clear that the doors are still just like the Historical Society above, not at all fitting with how underground this entrance seems. James is metaphorically descending, while his altitude in Silent Hill doesn't actually change. Due to the fact that the prison was located in the exact same location as the museum, we can clearly see James's delusions in full effect here, as we go on a pleasant adventure into the dark recesses of James's mind. We're now in the prison, and shortly the labyrinth. There's a lot that takes place here, and again, to avoid this purely being a story recap, I'll focus on some main points here. One particular prison cell stands out more than the others, as we frequently hear the voice of something deep and terrifying. This voice, mixed with the imagery shown here, had me believe that we would potentially be moving towards some religious or even satanic explanations for the town's horrors and why this is all happening as we reach the climax of the game. Having these thoughts, being completely unaware of the previous game's strong links to that exact same subject matter. During our time here, we find 3 tablets. These locations and images on these tablets represent our lovely characters, while also relating to Aztec mythology. These names are not ones I will be attempting to word for you, so enjoy a visual showcase while I talk about the mythology and connection instead. The Tablet of the Oppressor. So this tablet displays an Aztec man riding on top of a goddess in Aztec culture, the goddess of sin, vice, and sexual misdeeds. This goddess was also involved in the purification and forgiveness of these misdeeds. If we want to see what this represents, it can easily be an interpretation of Mary and James, with James trying to force Mary to forgive him of the sins that he has committed. Next we have the Tablet of the Gluttonous Pig. This tablet is for none other than Eddie himself, due to his murderous acts before visiting Silent Hill by maiming a football player and killing a dog. Our Aztec connection here is the god of the planet Venus. This god was generally considered dangerous and malevolent throughout mythology. Eddie and the god share similar traits in their willingness to kill or cause harm. And lastly we have the Tablet of the Seductress. Now this tablet is commonly mistaken for Maria, which I also had assumed, but it's actually for our 3rd sinner visiting Silent Hill, Angela. This tablet is for a seductress, of which Angela becomes one unwillingly for her father. There is more Aztec representation here, showing a history in relation to a goddess linked to the maguey plant. This plant is known to be used to make an alcoholic drink, which is being used here now to symbolize the alcoholism of Angela's father. These tablets serve a purpose. We end up in an open area where it seems that we're not alone. It's dark, we can't see a thing, and the ominous sounds of a horse racing around the arena make our heart pound. It's all uncertain what lies ahead. If we push through, we then find a gallows platform. This was only one method of execution for the prisoners, as they were given a choice between 2 methods, a final freedom. After some hole jumping, as the prison makes less and less sense, including a trip through the morgue, we enter the labyrinth. We experience the iconic scene between James and Maria between prison bars. This scene is put together in a way where it makes you look like James is the one in the cell, which I really like from a visual standpoint. Maria telling James things only him and Mary would know.
Aren't you Maria?
I'm not your Mary.
Maria tells James that she's real and tries to lure James into her side of the room, being highly suggestive. James agrees to this and begins his journey to her. James, Eddie, and Angela are all here, and it's reflected very well in the upcoming environments we are visiting. Parts of their 3 versions of Silent Hill clash here, mainly forming a maze from reflections of James's depression and confusion for us to navigate. The other 2 come into play here as Angela's trauma and Eddie's self-conscious paranoia influence their specific areas of the labyrinth most. Something very important comes up here, about a previous point towards James's sexual desires once again, the encounter with Angela and Abstract Daddy. Angela had killed her father, who had sexually and physically abused her, while her mother allowed it to happen. It is implied that her brother was also physically abusive to her. Despite the fact that we save Angela from this monster, she doesn't trust us. Angela goes on to explain her distrust of James and men in general, as from her valid experience they're only after one thing. We're shining the spotlight on James here, as the conversation he had with Mary only moments ago was one where she seemed to be inviting him into her room suggestively. And now we've arrived in front of a door that Maria is behind. The room we enter, numbered 208, is the same room that we see the dead body of James in Woodside Apartments. In a similar way, James enters this room to find Maria, dead. James is being punished once again for his desires here. We move on, and eventually we come to a small collection of graves. Eddie and Angela are among the names listed here, with James's open grave being another hole just for him to dive down into. This is where we find Eddie. This is very important, and more than just trying to stop Eddie, we see the hypocrisy of James Sunderland in full swing here.
You think it's okay to kill people?
He tries to take a moral high ground with Eddie, attempting to make him feel bad for his actions. This only fuels more hatred from Eddie, stating he and James are the same, as the town called them both. After we kill Eddie, James begins to show some disbelief and remorse for a moment. He's killed someone.
I killed a human being.
But then he asks himself a big question. Mary, did you really die 3 years ago? Shortly after this point, the letter we've been holding on to for so long has gone blank. James has worked his way through a labyrinth, both physically and mentally, and we're seeing him come closer to the exit and the truth. A quiet and lonely trip across the lake awaits us as we pass a small island relevant to the Rebirth ending. A small church is housed here, most likely related to the Order. But we're following the light off in the distance, and we've arrived. The Lakeview Hotel. Before we get into the main event of this location, we do have some important things to note here also. Laura reveals the letter written to her by Mary. She was leaving the hospital to go back home. This gives some perspective on how Laura has treated James so far, Mary acknowledging her hatred for him, but attempting to convince her to give him a chance. At the end of this letter, we see Mary's wish to have adopted Laura and wished her a happy 8th birthday. James is confused and tries to place the timeline of events. Laura, how old are you? Revealing that Laura turned 8 last week. So Mary couldn't have died 3 years ago. Laura runs off now in search of another letter. We're so close now, James. Silent Hill is constantly shaping itself and changing in different ways according to the visitor. With James, there are moments where we see a particular place or location, almost with rose-tinted glasses. Silent Hill in the form James remembers. In significant moments, our surroundings change. We see the true Silent Hill, in a sense. The easiest example of this is the hotel, in which after our big reveal post-videotape, the entire place is wrecked. So let's talk about it. We reach the climax of the game's story, where we are met with the reveal of James's true actions that led to his return to Silent Hill, and how his guilt effectively blacked him out from processing the true events that had transpired. James wanted to badly take it back. He was able to convince himself that he hadn't committed this cruel act and Mary was waiting for him here, where they could be happy. It wasn't really 3 years at all since Mary died. This happened recently, and James has been walking in a state of fatigue and disbelief of his cruel act that he summoned himself back to Silent Hill, created his own false narrative where he could go back and see Mary, and be punished and tormented trying. This is where things get weird. The radio, as it did at the beginning, cuts in with a voice. Mary's voice. It's clear now, we can hear her calling out to James. Is this real or just more illusions James is creating to prolong the inevitable? James leaves the room, and the hotel is no longer nice looking. It's disgusting and wet, and then it begins. The breakdown. James has been lying to himself up until this point, and armed with the truth, James is slowly realizing why he was summoned here. The music is haunting after this as James now navigates a hotel which makes no sense. He's walking through doors and ending up on different sides of the hotel. Some doors take him forwards, others right back to the beginning. James is unraveling here and he's trying to find a way out. We question whether or not this hotel is another illusion to mess with James or if this really is the hotel, flooded, abandoned, and unsalvageable. You think back to before we entered room 312. Was James navigating through this same ruined hotel unaware? Were we even really in a hotel, or just another illusion constructed by the town, recreating the hotel ravaged by a devastating fire? We wade through this environment only to end up in the opposite element, a hallway lit up with flames. Poor Angela staring blankly into what looks like a human body stuck to the wall under more soured flesh. You can actually see there are two bodies that appear stitched on the walls opposite each other. Looking at this image long enough allowed me to properly see the outline of the body, with dried blood surrounding the genitals. These bodies have been confirmed in both the novelization by James's description and Masahiro Ito. We try to approach her and it's clear that she's in her Silent Hill as she doesn't see James at first and mistakes him for Mama. Angela shows a really intense range of emotion here, as we go through excitement, surprise, fear, but then calm. A resolve we've never seen where she speaks down to James, and the camera shifts to first person. She seems to mock James about wanting to save her, as he then hangs his head, defeated. Angela has made up her mind. For me, it's always like this. She quite literally goes up in flames, and is never to be seen again. James then makes his way forward, coming across our final save point, this being the cover art for the Japanese version of the game, 9 squares forming a larger square. The guidebook for the game states this save point represents James's memories no longer being repressed. Once again, Maria, murdered in front of our eyes as we're met with 2 pyramid heads. This is where James realizes what's happening here, and what's happening to him.
I was weak. That's why I needed you. I needed someone to punish me for my sins. That's all over now. I know the truth. Now it's time to end this.
As we face off against these 2 enemies, the floor beneath us is detailed with faint markings of the seal of Metatron. Soon after, the Pyramid Heads realize that James no longer needs to be punished by them due to him accepting what he's done, and they end their own lives. Once we leave this room, we're at a long hallway, a visual representation of a home stretch, the final door, up ahead.
Mary?
What do you want, James?
I brought you some flowers.
Flowers? I don't want any damn flowers. Just go home already.
Mary, what are you saying?
Look, I'm disgusted. I don't deserve flowers. Between the disease and the drugs, you look like a monster. What are you looking at? Get the hell out of here. Leave me alone already. I'm no use to anyone. I'll be dead soon anyway. Maybe today. Maybe tomorrow.
It'd be easier if they'd just kill me. I guess the hospital is making a nice profit off me. They want to keep me alive.
Are you still here? I told you to go. Are you deaf? Don't come back. James. Wait. Please don't go. Stay with me. Don't leave me alone. I didn't mean what I said. Please, James. Tell me I'll be okay. Tell me I'm not going to die. Help me.
I wonder if that's the discussion they were having when he killed her. Depending on our choices, we are given multiple endings, of which I had the leave ending. We reach a rooftop. Maria, posing as Mary, fails at her last attempt of seduction to have James accept her. We are shown a horrific sight for the final boss, one final monster created from James's subconscious, completely representing Mary in the hospital bed, trapped in a nightmarish prison of sickness. The look of this creature also resembling Maria only just moments before being speared by Pyramid Head. After a final fight with this monster, it's over. This ending made me very emotional, and Monica Horgan, the voice of Mary and Maria, delivers one of the best performances I've witnessed. It was one of the most believable readings, due to the voice actor legitimately getting upset at what was written. It was a perfect take. While this is mainly considered the canon ending, a lot of people tend to favour the in-water ending, where James ends his life by driving off a cliff. An ending is not officially confirmed, and everyone has their preference of how James's story should end. Both Masahiro Ito and Gai Sihi both have stated in Water to be their choice for a canon ending, despite Sihi admitting he prefers the leave ending. Discussion comes up frequently mentioning Mary's body could be in the trunk of James' car, which plays into the In Water ending, but this is unconfirmed. According to the novelization of Silent Hill 2, Mary's corpse does reside in the trunk of James' car, but again, Ito and Sihi feel Mary was actually located in the back seat. But in the game, there is no actual character model to be found, as proven on the Silent Hill 2's Boundary Break episode by Shazez, a really interesting watch. I'd also like to state here that while my playthrough gave me the leave ending, I don't feel that James really deserved to get out. Both Angela and Eddie, these two characters living and suffering through torment, deserved to be free of Silent Hill more than James. Even if Eddie went a bit off the rails, he snapped due to consistent bullying which impacted his mental health. I won't defend Eddie, but we can acknowledge James committed far worse acts. I would have loved to see Angela get out, having survived Silent Hill, allowing her to accept her past and move on with her life, even taking Laura with her, the innocent in the story, giving Angela a reason to begin again in life. Ultimately, the only character to realise their lesson for being in Silent Hill was James, which allowed him to move on with his life and leave. For this reason, I'd also like to say that I feel the in-water ending fits almost too well with James's story. The idea of having Mary's corpse in the car with him as he drowns himself into the lake to be reunited with her in death is quite tragic and fits into the overall story. I'd like to perceive this one as my canon ending, after all has been said and done here. Silent Hill 2 is more than a game. While it's something we engage in through gameplay, the game's story addresses controversial topics, subject matter not regularly discussed. Each character has a place in the story and has various topics and themes represented. We navigate the emotions of feelings of grief, sexual frustration, relationship issues, terminal illnesses, the euthanasia of a loved one, and the implications of that choice. This is the main focal point throughout the game, but we are also shown a variety of issues stemming from Eddie on body image and bullying, Angela's tragic history of sexual abuse. The themes and events of the game explore high levels of variety of abuse and trauma. A whole slew of describing words can be listed here, as it really opens the Book of Nightmares relating to the darkest of human experiences, life and death, and the utter mess in between. The art direction paired with storytelling provides you with an unforgettable experience, one that stands the test of time, but still, almost 20 years later, is considered one of the greatest games to have graced the survival horror genre. Silent Hill 2 is an existential nightmare and masterpiece. Honestly, there can be so much to cover, break down, and discuss about this game that so many moments can take a long time to talk about. Silent Hill has a very passionate and loyal fanbase. There are numerous details and events that are still spoken about, argued, and referenced today. Looking back from my playthrough this year, it was able to bring many of you to discuss, reminisce, and tell your own stories about how you felt experiencing what I did for the very first time. I've loved the community that formed over my Silent Hill experience and hearing your stories and perspectives on Silent Hill. I'm really glad I chose to play this game and take it seriously, as while I wanted to share my blind experience with others, I wanted the game to be respected, as I value gameplay and the story over making jokes in an attempt to entertain, or overreacting to things and missing crucial details by not paying attention. I truly believe it is a shame Konami decided to take Silent Hill away from a team who cared deeply about video games and instead flushed it down the toilet. Here's hoping we do eventually get gifted with something fresh, exciting, and modern for Silent Hill that can bring some happiness to the dedicated fanbase that are constantly hurt and let down by consistent rumours of remakes, reboots, sequels, Silent Hills, and otherwise. 2020 and its numerous rumours on Silent Hill making appearances has only left us with disappointment. All I can say is I'm very grateful that I was able to experience this incredible story, and I love video games a lot, because sometimes video games become more. They change things, they become an art form, inspire creative ideas and stories to come, while keeping people talking about it for almost 2 decades. Next year will be the 20th anniversary of Silent Hill 2, and I think it's amazing to see the love it still gets and the community of people that have stopped by my channel to talk about it. I really hope you enjoyed this video, as it's something very special to me and something I put a lot of effort into. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you next time.
In my restless dreams, I see that town,
This is the letter.
Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you. waiting for you to come to see me. But you never do. And so I wait, wrapped in my cocoon of pain and loneliness. I know I've done a terrible thing to you. Something you'll never forgive me for. I wish I could change that. But I can't. I feel so pathetic and ugly laying here, waiting for you. Every day I stare up at the cracks in the ceiling, and all I can think about is how unfair it all is. The doctor came today. He told me I could go home for a short stay. It's not that I'm getting better. It's just that this may be my last chance. I think you know what I mean. Even so, I'm glad to be coming home. I've missed you terribly. But I'm afraid, James. I'm afraid you don't really want me to come home. Whenever you come see me, I can tell how hard it is on you. I don't know if you hate me or pity me, or maybe I just disgust you. I'm sorry about that. When I first learned that I was going to die, I just didn't want to accept it. I was so angry all the time, and I struck out at everyone I loved most. Especially you, James. That's why I understand if you do hate me. But I want you to know this, James. I'll always love you. Even though our life together had to end like this, I still wouldn't trade it for the world. We had some wonderful years together. Well, this letter has gone on too long, so I'll say goodbye. I told the nurse to give this to you after I'm gone. That means that as you read this, I'm already dead. I can't tell you to remember me, but I can't bear for you to forget me. These last few years since I became ill, I am so sorry for what I did to you, did to us. You've given me so much, and I haven't been able to return a single thing. That's why I want you to live for yourself now. Do what's best for you, James. James, you made me happy.
Wow. That was the best voice acting in the entire game. They had to nail that.
even like the swallows in her voice and how she was breathing, and you could feel the sadness in her voice.